Welcoming you to the specific session here with Eagle FM as well, where we're also at the Namibia Agronomic Board. Joining me today is the General Manager, Mr. Gilbert Mulonda. Mr. Mulonda, thank you once again for taking the time and welcome to this specific session.
All right, thank you, and good afternoon to our listeners.
Mr. Mulonda, starting off obviously with our first talk, or our first departure point, help us understand what is the Namibia Agronomic Board, as well as also what is its mandate and what does it aim to help to do?
Right, thank you very much. The Namibian Agronomic Board, number one, it was established in 1985, quite a long time ago. And it is actually established in terms of the Agronomic Industry Act, which is Act number 2 of 1992. So in terms of our mandate, we are actually mandated to promote the agronomic and horticulture industry in Namibia, and also to facilitate production, processing, storage, and marketing of controlled crops. So there are specific crops that we actually control. We don't control all the crops that are out there. We only control those that are actually gazetted.
Exactly. And if we have to look at that overall mandate, as well as also the realms within which the NAB operates in, how does the NAB try to maximize its own efficiency in this regard?
Yeah. In terms of maximizing efficiency, I think there is always limited resources in terms of financial resources particularly. So we always make sure that whatever funds that we actually get for the services that we provide to industry are actually utilized for the purposes of improving the services that we offer to the industry. So on the other hand, as you know, crop production is a new topic in Namibia. And therefore, we really make sure that the team, in terms of the workforce that we have, they are capacitated in terms of training to make sure that they are able to deliver on our mandate at any given time. So I think that's how we actually maximize efficiency as far as in terms of our services that we offer.
Exactly. And if we head into which has been one of the most spoken about, if I can say spoken about terminologies, with food security, that has been an important point of discussion. This ultimately being in the middle of recent food price rises that have taken place. What is the Agronomic Board's place in all this dynamic position, if we can call it that, of food security?
Now, food security is quite a very complex subject matter. It actually measures quite a lot of aspects. So from our perspective, when we talk about food security, we actually look at issues related to availability, accessibility, and affordability. So I think in terms of availability, we look at whether people have got, can be able to access food that is actually available. Then when we talk about accessibility, is whether they can have be able to have access to the food that is actually produced. Because sometimes you find that food is available in one region, but people cannot be able to access it because of so many other obstacles like the distance and so on. So I think that is one aspect that we look at when we actually measure food security. Then in terms of the aspect of affordability, it's quite a very major topic at the moment. You find a lot of consumers actually complaining that the food prices that they see in the retail shop is too expensive, which is very true. But I think someone must also imagine to say, this food that is actually in the shop, how much did it cost somebody to actually produce it? So I think if you go backwards, you would understand why food is actually more expensive at retail shop, particularly for their consumers. So at the moment, we know some of the biggest line, or particularly the staple food, your maize meal, your bread wheat flour, even mahangu meal, you see the prices are quite higher than normal. So what happened, I think we know in terms of the war between Russia and Ukraine. Those are some of the major producers of some of these commodities. And therefore, because of the war, it actually creates a shortage in the market, which actually pushes demand up. But on the other hand, you also have got inputs such as your fertilizer, your energy in terms of your diesel, particularly for the agriculture, whereby these two countries that are at war are actually some of the biggest producers. So in the end, to produce that food in Namibia, it actually becomes too expensive. And therefore, at retail level, you see that prices of food products are actually quite very higher than normal. So on the other hand, particularly in terms of horticulture, we have seen shortages of certain lines because of the aspect of seasonality. It's not every crop that you can produce throughout the year. Some crops, they've got a specific season that you can actually produce them. And therefore, this shortage is not only in Namibia, but from our major importing countries like in South Africa, on your lines like your tomatoes, your potatoes, including onions, there is quite a shortage there. And that's why you see a very big push in terms of the prices on the shelf.
Exactly. Yeah. And just in terms, still staying on the food security component, Mr. Mulonda, how critical a role does the agronomic board itself, just for now, just for shortening itself, but the NAB, how critical a role does it play in achieving Namibia's own food security? And this is obviously, we have to stay in the line of observing that, it's not an overnight success or an overnight process.
No, thank you. The Namibian Agronomic Board is not the only institution that is actually mandated to drive food security. There are so many other players that are given that responsibility to ensure food security in the country, including the private sector. So from the Agronomic Board point of view, we have put up policies in place to make sure that whatever food that we actually produce in the country must find its way to the market. So we have got the market share promotion scheme. This is a scheme that was introduced around 2005. At that time, Namibia was only producing roughly about 5% of its demand for fruits and vegetables. So at the moment, as you speak, that figure has moved over to 47 currently. So that is quite a significant increase, and that is because of the policies that we have in place that actually ensures that we stimulate local production through the support of retailers that are actually operating in Namibia. So that is the program that we are actually running to actually ensure that we are able to stimulate food production on the ground. Then in terms of agronomy, particularly in terms of grain production, we produce mainly three types of grain in Namibia, which is white maize, pure millet, popularly known as mahangu, plus wheat. So those are the main grain crops that we produce. So the Namibian Agronomic Board has a policy or a scheme that is there to actually ensure that whatever food that is actually produced out there doesn't go to waste. It must find its way to the market so that we can be able to address food shortages and so on. So I think the biggest question that comes in, it's at what cost does that food comes? So as you know, Namibia is actually a net importer of inputs. So basically, if you are a net importer of inputs, it means your production cost will be very high compared to most of your neighboring countries and so on. And I think that is the situation that we have currently, where we have got a very high production cost that is actually driving the very high prices of food product on the shelf. So I think that is something that we are currently looking at to make sure that probably in the future we are able to focus more on addressing the issue of high production cost so that it should be cheaper to produce food so that food becomes more affordable at retail level.
Exactly. Yeah. And obviously from the food security component, there's obviously you've mentioned a few or one or two aspects of the challenges which could potentially be there, but what are the biggest challenges in the NAB assisting with this component of the food security currently?
Yes. Yeah. No, thank you. I think the biggest challenge, again, when we talk about food security, there are specific crops in terms of international norms that are actually known to drive food security. These are staple food crops. Now, if you look at the staple food crops that we produce in Namibia, particularly mahangu, white maize, these are crops that are mainly grown under rain-fed conditions. Now, rain-fed, it means you depend on nature. So sometimes nature may not be so good that you can produce a crop, but otherwise, from what we have seen, because of the issue of climate variability, the production of some of this crop has been affected from year on because of the unavailability of rainfall in terms of moisture to really grow the crops. So that is the situation that we are currently facing. And for Namibia, it's a little bit worse because of the fact that irrigated production, it's not so common, but it's gaining momentum at the moment. Like for this year, almost about 80% of our white maize production actually comes from irrigated farming. So, which is a plus, because that is one way of actually adapting to all these changes that we actually have no control over.
And now getting into sort of like the specifics of the NAB, like for example, how has the NAB under your tenure or your leadership, how has it thrived? And in terms of that specific growth, what can you share with us?
Yes. No, thank you. I think the NAB had actually put various measures in place to make sure that there is proper coordination in the market in the first place, to make sure that if food is produced, it must find its way to the market and it's also sold on time. On the other hand, we also understand the pressure that the farmers are actually undergoing, particularly from competition point of view, where they need to compete with some of the products that are actually imported, which are much cheaper. So we have also put measures in place to make sure that our farmers are actually protected so that they can continue farming, because the moment they stop farming, we would actually have much of a bigger challenge. So I think those are some of the things that we have done. Apart from that, we have also ensured that there are grading regulations that are actually in place to guarantee the aspect of quality and also to ensure that the aspect of food safety is also addressed. So all those regulations that are in place are really to safeguard the needs of the end consumer. In terms of horticulture, we have also developed approximately, it's about 16 crop-specific marketing standards that we have developed to make sure that there is fairness in terms of really buying these products and grade them, because the grade of a product actually influences the price at the end of the day. So I think those are some of the things that we have done. There is also the aspect of compliance levels in terms of compliance to food safety, to product quality, in terms of border management, in terms of compliance to different marketing and production regulation. So we have also done quite very well in that space, whereby we normally record between 90 to 95% compliance rate of the industry, which is a good reflection in terms of what we do and what the industry are actually implementing out there.
Yes. Just also in another, if there are other highlights specifically also in the specific, which links to the first question in terms of so far under your tenure and leadership, what other highlights can you also share with regards to further developments that might have taken place in this regard?
No, thank you. What we have also done at the moment is that we have introduced the aspect of in-house research in the NAB, because research, particularly in the agricultural space, it's quite very limited. And most of the time we need to take decisions, and these decisions must be supported with evidence, which is the research part. So at the moment, we have embarked on research in terms of the seed and seed research and production, which is basically something that we have done from our side in collaboration with other partners such as UNAM. So the whole idea is basically to ensure that we are able to do more research and get results that could actually drive production on the ground, because the idea is actually to discover some varieties that can either adapt better to climate, that can give high yields and so on, so that our farmers could actually adopt some of those varieties. So apart from that, we also have got some projects that we actually running with a French company in terms of the potato production. So we have also done some research there in terms of different varieties. There were a total of 6 varieties. And at the end of the research, we actually discovered that there are 4 of those varieties that could actually perform better in Namibia when compared to some of the varieties that we currently grow. So I think that is one area where we have actually improved quite a lot, and we really want to ensure that we keep on researching even on other areas other than seed-related research.
And then, if obviously from the research, which was good news, one of the key developments this year specifically is where the NAB also went into collaboration in an MOU with the NCRST specifically, and this is all about coordinating and collaborating the various activities with regards to value chains. How can you help us also, share a little bit and understand that specific partnership as well?
Yeah. No, thank you. The NAB had signed an MOU with the NCRST, and the scope of that MOU is really to coordinate research, particularly for the crop industry, but also to collaborate in terms of testing for GMO or genetically modified products. So as you know, the NCRST is actually mandated to oversee the implementation of the Biosafety Act. And the Biosafety Act actually advocates in terms of the issue of GMO or technology controls and so on. So from our side, we have partnered them because the aspect of GMO currently is being regulated in Namibia. And we really want to ensure that we are able to implement the activities that would actually enforce compliance in the industry for the benefit of the end consumer. So in terms of research, there are various research that we want to focus on. This will be research that is related particularly to the aspect of technology in the crop sector. As you know, the crop sector is still an infant industry, and therefore the adoption of technology is actually very low. And therefore we just want to ensure that farmers are able to actually adopt new technology that would actually improve productivity at farm level.
And then, working from that MOU, obviously there's also one of the big questions with regards to youth. Is the youth specifically in this regard also getting involved in specific initiatives, such initiatives like also participating in agriculture itself, or that is associated to where the NAB is participating also? And how can Namibian youth be capacitated as well to take part in agricultural activities in the country?
Thank you. The biggest challenge that we have in this country when it comes to youth, I'm sure if you go in many of the rural areas, even at commercial farms, you find that those that are doing farming, it's elderly people that are there. It's people who have retired because they've got a bit of money and they would want to go and do something to keep themselves busy. So the youth are actually busy with so many other things other than farming. So that is the situation that we have. And in terms of land ownership, if you look at land ownership, even myself, at my age, where I come from, I don't own land. Land belongs to the parents. So that is how it is. And therefore, as a result of that, many youth are actually not interested in farming. They would rather do farming after they go in retirement, or they would rather do farming when they see that there is no any other option, no any other alternative. So I think that is the situation that we have, and addressing the aspect of land ownership, particularly for the youth, it's a very important aspect because that is a stepping stone in terms of really attracting them into farming. So the other aspect is the aspect of access to affordable finance. Um, to really borrow money for farming as a youth, you'll be asked so many questions that in the end, you'll only pass maybe one of those questions and or meet one of those requirements, which becomes very difficult because you don't have means to actually ensure that you are able to secure funding that will be able to assist you to actually do your farming production. So in terms of the MOU between the NAB and the NCRIST, the involvement of the youth is very key. Youth are people that want to discover, and research is there to actually discover more. So that is the purpose of the research. And I think from our end, we will ensure that the youth are actually involved in most of our research activities, particularly the graduates from the universities and so on, so that they are able to assist us in terms of really bringing out the new technology that we actually need in the farming industry.
And then leading on from that specific question, if are there any other challenges, because some of them have been identified now with regards to like financing as well as also participation rate, but are there also any other challenges in this regard of trying to get the youth also involved?
Yeah. I think the other challenge is that generally, if you look at it, the youth are not so well organized, particularly in the agricultural space. So you'll find them in different areas. Recently, we have seen the formation of different associations, different organizations that are there to actually address the issues of the youth in the agricultural space. So I think that is the starting point, but I think it's actually moving quite very slow. We could actually do better. And the very important point is that for the youth to actually join some of these organizations, it means that they must have interest in farming. If they don't have interest in farming, you'll have organizations that have got no participation. So I think that is very important so that we get more and more of the youth organized to create platforms where they can air their concern, where they can influence decision making. So I think that is quite a very important point at this stage.
And if we take a look specifically where the NAB is now participating in, and these are projects that the NAB might now have either initiated or are currently busy with or running, what is the extent so far of some of these projects and what are some of them?
No, thank you very much. Like I've indicated before, the NAB is running different projects at the moment, and I've already touched on the issue of seed research and production. So currently we are more focusing on the research part. So we are researching on different varieties of staple food crops, which is white maize, wheat, and pure millet. So those are the crops that we are actually testing. And so far we have done some field trials on more than 100 varieties of these crops. So they are tested in different locations of the country, in different production areas. And the results are actually quite very impressive at the moment. Because if we look at the issue of wheat production, for example, wheat is one of the crops that we actually struggling to produce as a country. And the main factor there is that normally you would go to some of the agri-input suppliers and buy your seeds from there, and you are not sure whether these seeds are actually adaptable to your climate, to your conditions, and so on. So I think that is a biggest factor. And from our side, we really want to make sure that we are able to identify some of the varieties of these seeds that can perform very well in different production zones. So I think that is what we are actually focusing on at the moment, to make sure that in the future, probably we are able to produce our own seeds that were tested in our own climatic environment. Then we also have got different programs in terms of capacity building, particularly for the farmers, on good agricultural practices. So we are in a process of running a program on local gap, which is basically a food safety standard that is implemented at farm level, to make sure that the practice that the farmer implements on the farm, it should be in line with that standard to safeguard the issues of food safety. And also it brings about improved efficiency, because everything that you implement through this standard, it must be measured, there must be record in place, and therefore it will bring that part of efficiency at farm level. So then there are also other projects that we have planned to actually do in the future, within the short period of time from now, which is the banana production project, which is basically more research that we want to do to really establish in terms of where can we be able to produce bananas in this country, what varieties, and to really get out some of this information, so that in the end, this information could be given back to the farmers for them to be able to produce bananas. So if you look at production areas like the Zambezi, Kavango, the whole northern part of Namibia, including the karst area or the maize triangle. So these are more or less high rainfall area, and I think there is climate that where we can actually grow bananas in those areas. Because at the moment, bananas are imported 100%. But if you go in some of these areas, you'll see bananas being grown by individuals at household level, at very small scale, and they are getting something. So that shows you there is potential there. We just need to research more, so that we can be able to discover what varieties can really do better in those areas.
And then a handful of those examples that you just gave now, Mr. Mulonda, actually indicates to the strengthening with regards to sort of like the import discussion that was also made mention of earlier. But in that regard, you know, if there's still more to add on in terms of Namibia's the probability in terms of what we import more, what more can be done to strengthen that? If, for example, when Namibia is looking at importing some of these crops in the next period, or ultimately in the current period, because the research also adds into looking at our own dependence in that regard, what do we still have to look forward to in this specific window in terms of heading forward into the future?
Yeah. I think in terms of importing, I must say that the objective of the NAB is not really to see more imports, but to reduce imports. So that's what we are working towards. So going forward in the future, of course, there is no country that can actually produce everything. So as much as you'd want to increase local production, you'll still be faced with so many challenges that would actually prevent you from producing some of your crops, like apples, for example. We know that apples is a cold climate kind of crop. And to do it in Namibia, you can produce something, but it will not be at very high efficient levels. So I think that's what we are looking at as far as producing what we can produce given our climate, and be able to import what we cannot be able to produce at that particular moment. So I think that is the whole scenario, to really make sure that we are able to maximize on the crops that we really have got potential, and we have got the right climate to grow those crops.
Yeah. Mr. Mulonda, once again, this brings us to the end of our talk for today. I'd like to thank you for taking the time as the General Manager of the NAB for engaging with us and our listeners and ultimately also our viewers. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you once again, sir.